Welcome again to the Visionary Leader Summit. My name is Nicole Farkouh, and I'm here today with Peter Block, who I know many of you are very excited to hear from. For those of you who are not familiar with Peter, he's an author, a consultant, and a citizen of Cincinnati, Ohio. His work is about empowerment, stewardship, chosen accountability, and the reconciliation of community. Peter's the author of several best-selling books about ways to create workplaces and communities that work for everyone. And his ultimate work is to bring change into the world through consent and connectedness rather than through mandate and force. Peter, welcome. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you. It's a nice introduction. Happy to be here for me too.
So the title of our talk, and we're going to just see where it goes, but the title that we're giving this is Leading for Community in Organizations and Beyond. And I'd like to start us off with a question that kind of was sparked by my review of some of your work, where you talk about personal transformational work not being enough, but it in many ways being a distraction from community transformation. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Well, we have this idea, and if you look at religious traditions, if you look at organizations, we all think that the individual is the point, especially in the West. And so we're all working on ourselves, and Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. And my experience and fear is that I'll work on myself the rest of my life and it will stop there. It'll stop at the edge of my skin. And so I've stopped working on myself, partly because after a while, the marginal returns are really low. All right. But also, I just feel we need language and for a collective experience, a communal experience, and especially in this country. We've so privatized everything that the common good, the common ground has been left behind. The communal ground, even the word community, common, communist, all that as a negative. And so to me, it's the individualism of the culture that frightens. I'm not against self-development, and I believe in it. It's just that we think if you train 100 individuals in a company, something will shift. Nothing will shift except those individuals will be better husbands and wives and partners at home. But it doesn't change culture. It doesn't change the way we do business. Yeah. And so I just want to move it beyond and say, well, let's talk about communal effectiveness, collective effectiveness, care about the larger. And we don't really know how to talk about that. We still think it's the individual.
And I think that's so true. And what's coming to mind, as silly as this may be, is a conversation I was having with my daughter on the way to school this morning. And she has been invited to go with her friend to the mall next. She's 7, and her friend's birthday is on Friday. And so her mom is taking her friend and my daughter to the mall. And she was saying, and we were having this conversation about, is she buying her things and me things, or just me, her things? And am I supposed to watch while she's buying her things? And I said, well, I'm going to call her and we'll talk to her, but it would be weird if she was buying you things, because our society is such that you take care of your own, and it would be weird actually for her to be buying you and her daughter a bunch of things for her daughter's birthday, but that's not actually the world I would like us to be living in. And I was like, how do I explain this?
I know, you lost your daughter halfway through that, but it's a good point.
I think she made it to like 3/4 of the way.
I know. And the other thing is that, she has the question of a consumer. And so you say a citizen is somebody who's creating the world, a consumer who's someone who's outsourced and who thinks they don't have enough. And so it's so powerful, though, where the mall is now our community center, and our communal activity is shopping, and our measurement of the culture, our well-being, is are consumers buying or not. So if you're really talking about creating an alternative future, a communal future, then you almost depart from the communal consumer culture and say, well, what can we do together? What can we create together? And your daughter, like all of us, is caught up in this mindset. What she was saying is, why am I going along if I'm not getting anything?
For me, right.
Yeah, and so that's the same when you're running a business. What's in it for me? People ask leaders, what's in it for me? And my answer is nothing. Now, you want to do it or not? I'm not your mother. I'm not your father. So a lot of the work I've done, a lot of work for organizational life, is to get away from the parent-child model.
Yeah.
And bosses are not responsible for their children's well-being, their employees. Bosses are not responsible for morale. If you're worried about low morale, well, why don't you raise it? And people complain about bosses, and I say, well, why are you complaining about your boss? You're creating your boss. The inmates run the prison. So it takes you to a whole conversation about trying to build a partnership, relationships, see the world in a partnership way instead of a parent-child way.
And at the same time, from what I've understood with your work, there is a role for leaders with a capital L to create the conditions in which the community can happen and in which people can take accountability for themselves. Is that?
And each other, yes.
And each other.
Perfect. That the task of leadership is not to be a role model, be a visionary. You don't have to worry about style, okay? You're just fine. Even if your style isn't great, it's just fine. But your job is to help connect employees with each other in service of the common good, in service of the business doing well, the organization doing well. Not-for-profits have the same issue. How do we get people connected to each other instead of connected to me? Because most of our leadership training is how to control people in a way they feel good about it. Well, give it out. And so, especially for purpose-driven institutions who have a mission, well, you say, well, we have to have people experience with each other what we're trying to bring into the world. So if you're a not-for-profit, it means you have a social purpose. And you're trying to bring that into the world, and you're trying to help people do that. Well, your people have to experience that with each other. Connectedness, a high trust, doing things together, not compete with each other. And so that's the world I'm trying to give voice to.
And so what have you, I know you have sort of a set of practices and ways of thinking to create this culture, and I don't know if you want to go through them all, but it would be great to have you talk a little bit about that and maybe give some examples of where you've seen it working really
well. The context is, if you want to create an alternative future, you have to change the narrative. You have to change the story about who we are. So all transformation is linguistic. All transformation is shifting the narrative, shifting the conversation. You need to have people engage each other with a conversation they haven't had before. And you can get very specific about that. Most conversations are about bosses, they're about ideas, they're about how those people should change. So one thing you ask people, for whatever you're complaining about, what are you doing to help contribute to the very thing that upsets you? You ask people, what's the refusal you've been postponing? Because if you can't say no, your yes means nothing. You ask people, what are you good at? You know, we work in neighborhoods now. And the social services, not-for-profits, are generally organized around deficiencies, around needs. We do needs analysis. We talk about neighborhoods and the community and the world in terms of their needs, their weaknesses. Every night on the news, we're blasted with what's wrong with the world. Yeah. It doesn't take us anywhere. It may be interesting, like a car accident, but it doesn't take us anywhere. So you want conversations about what is your gift? What are you good at? What are you trying to create? What's the possibility? So these are all conversations of agency. As a leader, I want to engage people in conversations with each other where they become co-creators of a future, co-creators of a place, and nobody showed up for them. People came as consumers, like your daughter. Okay, I'm working here. What are you going to do for me? What have you done for me lately? What's in it? Those questions are dead end. Don't ever answer them. People say, what's in it for me? You say, I don't know. And so the real shift that I've seen is service organizations focusing on what are you good at. So one of the things I've been close to is a hip hop urban arts center in Cincinnati. And most people think of urban kids as a problem to be solved. Pull up your pants, make eye contact, straighten your hat. And so what this group has done is say, what do you love to do? And they say, well, we love hip hop, we love music, we love dance. Okay, you come here and we're going to teach you how to make music, how to engineer music, how to sing music, how to write music, how to dance. And when you, in doing that, you're going to learn amazing discipline. You're going to learn amazing cooperation. And we're giving you an alternative to street life. And it turns out that what creates low-performing organizations is people's sense of isolation, where this larger culture thinks it's lack of clarity, lack of goals, lack of strategy. All that language takes me nowhere. A better plan, a better blueprint, a better measurement. It means I want tomorrow to look just like yesterday. Mm-hmm. I ask you, what are you good at? What do you want to create together? And so in this, Elements is the name of it. People come and they realize that their creative side is valued. Mm-hmm. And then maybe they can construct an alternative future for themselves than what we thought is possible. And it's so unique because every other agency in town is asking them, how many years of schooling do you have? Well, you ask somebody how many years of schooling, you know what you're doing? You're calling them stupid. How safe is your neighborhood? You ask people about your safety of your neighborhood, you're calling them dangerous. So this is all shift in narrative, shift in language, and this is leadership job, is to create a conversation about what people want to create, what are they good at, and make the conversation between each other, not with me. You know, we do surveys all the time. How is your boss? Do they nurture you? Do they support you? Forget it. They're not your mother. They're not your father. Yeah. Someday your daughter will say that to you. You know? I don't need more mothering. I'm grown. I'm not the daughter you had in mind. And you'll say, God bless you. Yeah. But you got a ways to go.
Hopefully I do. Hopefully I have a ways to go.
You will. I know.
So I noticed that the way that you invited people into those conversations is through asking questions. And you talk a lot in your work about asking the right types of questions. And so you listed a few questions just now as we were talking, but I'm wondering if there's characteristics that you all can offer for folks to find and create their own questions that can elicit this sort of paradigm.
Exactly. So the questions need to be personal, ambiguous, and anxiety-provoking. Because under conditions of ambiguity, all right, and personal, I am required or invited to be accountable for what's going on around me. So they're all questions that confront people with their freedom. To be free is to be anxious, all right? And you can't have your freedom without anxiety. So if you're anxious, then you pat yourself on the back and you say, good, I'm choosing a life of freedom and choice. Where most of the world wants safety. They want to be safe. They want to get it right. That's why we put up with things. That's why we elect the leaders that we do, because we think they will keep me safe and let me off the hook. And so as soon as you choose safety, though, you're choosing dependency. You're choosing to put your fate in someone else's hands. Now, if it's God, that's a good idea. If it's a second level supervisor, you're a fool. You're a fool. Now, my peers' hands in a minute. So instead of putting my fate, my future in the hands of my boss, I need a boss, I need a leader, I need somebody who knows this business, somebody to bring us together. I need somebody to point me in the right direction as to what's good for this service or this not-for-profit. What are we here for? But in the execution, I need peers. I don't need bosses. And so the leadership, stewardship, which is different than managing. Managing is giving order and structure to the universe. And you have the language of cost, efficiency, speed, scale, progress, goals. Those are all nice things, just like a dishwasher. I want something to wash my dishes. I like a car. I like a phone. I like a little Zoom call once in a while. But they're not the point. The point has to do with connection, relationship, overcoming people's isolation. People that are suffering in this world suffer from isolation. They don't suffer from lack of education or schooling or support or anything. It's just we're so isolated we don't even know it.
Yeah, there's a phrase that has played in my mind since I studied cultural anthropology in college, and it was the isolation of modernity. And I just
big deal.
Getting worse and
big
worse
deal.
And worse every day.
It's getting worse and worse, and all these little things we've got to bring us together, they don't help.
Right.
They're net neutral. And so it is, cultural anthropology is the way to think about what we're talking about. How do you create a culture? How do you create a set of habitual ways of being together that affirm our relatedness and treat relationships as the point, not a fringe benefit. And, we've done this, we have this workshop, Flawless Consulting Skills Workshop we've done for years. And it's really about helping people who think being right is useful to also get connected.
That brings up the phrase that I have been holding on to a lot in my relationship of, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy?
I think that's a great question. I'll give you a cousin to that question.
Yeah.
Because people are in conflict. In years I was doing conflict resolution, and we all involved in one way or another. And they say, well, blah, 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 blah. I said, I got a question for you. You want to be right or you want to work something out?
Yeah.
And if they want to be right, I always said, hire a lawyer. Being right is the booby prize. And then another, Warner says, what will people give up in order to be right? Everything. So that is the leadership role, is to ask people, let's work. If you want to work something out, you want to be right, you want to be right, what are you doing here? Our righteousness is our colonial nature. Yeah. And then I like the idea that there's nothing to argue about. And so if you want to be right, there's lots to argue about. And so when people give me a hard time, I just warn them. I say, if you're going to give me a hard time, I'm warning you now. I'm going to take your side. And so in some ways you disarm aggression, you disarm conflict.
Like
by not.
Aikido.
Pardon?
It's like verbal Aikido.
It is. That's what's beautiful about that. It is. And so good point. Well, what do you mean good point? Aren't you going to argue with me? No. And people ask you questions, what's the future going to look like? What's going to happen? I don't know. And they say, well, that's not the kind of leadership I'm looking for. And you say, how do you think I feel about it? It's like, so it puts us on a par. And stewardship is to hold something in trust for the next generation. And the next generation are people at the bottom and the edge of the institution. And so what you're doing is confronting them with the fact that they have more control than they imagined. And they need to be connected to each other in order to deal with what they thought their parent or boss could provide. I need to find from you, my sister, what I thought leaders and people at the top are going to do for us. Mm.
I want to just take a minute, because I feel like that's a really powerful idea.
Yeah. It's the point.
Yeah. The point. It's a powerful point. The image that's coming to my mind as we're talking is there's a really profound mindset shift, or I'm not even sure what the jargon is leaving me right now, but sort of the difference between leader as making people safe and leader as agitator. holding a container to some degree, but agitating within the container to like allow the evolution of what's happening within it.
Right.
And
Well, see, nicely, the world shakes the container more than I can handle. But what you're saying also is a leader engages people with each other, especially the stranger. All right, so you're asking questions people aren't used to answering. You're having conversations we haven't had before with people I'm not used to talking to. That changes the world. Then I can be surprised. If all I do is live into like-mindedness, I'll never be surprised. I'll never learn. And at the moment, I'll feel comfortable, and tomorrow I'll be disappointed. And so you're asking people to engage with strangers, and this whole culture is terrified of the stranger. And it's killing us, literally. You know, it leads to violence eventually when people choose like-mindedness, when they look too much to the leader to define a future for me, when they choose safety. Then after a while, something blows up, you know, and so most conflict in organizations grows out of not difference of opinions, people are disconnected and isolated. So as a leader, you're there as a convener. It's a shame we have a professional title called facilitator. This is everybody's job. We don't need a trained facilitator to decide to work something out. We need to decide to work something out. And for us to do that, then the hell with my feelings, the hell with my point of view being right. What is the world asking of us now? That's why you're doing this program.
yeah.
You know, why do you do this? You don't have to. Well, because you're trying to heal the world in some way.
Right. Because I know I'm not alone in that question of what is the world asking of us right now.
Beautiful question.
Yeah.
And we need to answer that together and never be happy with the answer. You know, the Jews are great because the Messiah hasn't come yet. So we don't know what the hell's going on. You know, all we got is questions. My daughter called me from college once. She said, "Dad, you never answered my questions growing up. Now I know why." And I said, "Why?" She said, "You're a Jew and you're still waiting for the Messiah, you idiot." I thought, good point. She finally forgave me.
Yeah.
So the questions are more powerful than the answers is the thing. And the conversation, the lateral conversation changes the world. And it's hard.
Yeah.
It's unpredictable.
It's unpredictable.
Yeah. That's why it's hard.
Right. Right. Actually, and there was just a quote that I was going to raise that I had pulled out of some of your writings that I find really interesting. You write, any change in a culture or behavior has elements of mystery, paradox, and suffering contained with it. And the urge for quick, low cost, low risk ways of changing is a fool's path. And, you know, we talked about sort of the culture that we live in of isolation, but it's also this really, really fast pace, which I think is what is contributing in many ways. It's both a byproduct and a contributor to the increasing isolation in my assessment of the situation. And so I feel like at some level we need a deeper, slower path because that is what is required in order to connect. And I'm curious if you agree with that. And if you do, if you have any ideas for how to help us to slow down so that those connections can happen.
I 100% agree with you, period. Speed is a defense against depth. And so the faster I move, the less time there is to question where I'm going. And there's plenty of time. There's all the time in the world. Most meetings are 1 hour meetings are 53 minutes of anxiety and 7 minutes of going somewhere. So why don't we just skip the first 53 minutes? Well, how do we get here? What's the problem? What do they do? All this kind of, and people repeat themselves in meetings. I think if I say it often enough. And so I agree completely that the speed, the conversation of speed, the conversation of cost drives us apart. And it means nothing of value, of real meaning is going to happen in the world. Real meaning going to happen in the world. And our impatience is fed by the products of convenience. So I buy some technology now. By the time I get to my car, it's obsolete. So I could spend the rest of my life walking in my car and going back and getting a newer version. Okay, if the supply chain was good enough. And so this notion I don't have enough time is a symptom of my having bought the consumer market culture, which means more, 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 faster, 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 cheaper, cheaper, cheaper. And it's a hard way to live.
And what is your alternative to that? What do you see as the possibility?
We ask questions about meaning, purpose, and postpone questions of methodology. See, everybody wants to know, how did you get there? Well, first of all, I didn't. Okay. And what matters? Why are we doing this? What's important? Methodology is simple. People know what to do. It is possible to leave a meeting without a list. You know, you're not going to get arrested. And so you just want to say, well, what are we trying to do here? And then what's the best way? Who do we want to do it with? What do we want from each other? The workshop we run on consulting skills is really about contracting. You know, I wrote this book 30 some years ago and it's still selling it. What the hell is that about? You know, and because basically it says, if you and I want to do something together, the most important conversation we have is, what do we want from each other? All right, what do you want from me? What do I want from you? That's how work gets done. The actual techniques and tools and projects and measurements, we can come up with those in 10 minutes. But if we're not clear about what we want from each other, if we aren't able to say no to each other without it costing us anything, if we're not able to ask, what are we doing to cause the thing that's bothering us? You know, be agents, be accountable. That's what creates the world. That's what creates projects. Successful projects are people who know how to contract, how to say no, how to focus on their gifts. What are we good at? What are you good at? You know, what am I good at? Those are powerful conversations, rather than let's lay out a path. I need the path. If I'm going to build a bridge, I need an engineer. But if you and I are going to change the way we serve our clients or citizens, mostly we need a conversation of what do we want from each other and what are we really here for.
So there's a little dissonance for me in what you just said, because what do I want from you and what do you want from me actually feels like it's at that consumer level, but I'm guessing that's not what you are meaning.
No.
And so it's like, I'm wondering if it starts with grounding it in possibility. What are we trying to create together? And then
good. Then what? Yes, absolutely. I agree.
How can I contribute to that? What do I see that you could contribute to that?
Right. Dropped alone, it sounds like an entitled conversation. In the context of what are we here for, possibilities, what the world requiring of us, what's our job, what's the pet. In that context, at some point, then the way we get closer is to share what do we want for each other, from each other, in order to make this project work. Not in terms of how we're going to be together, maybe in a personal life, but what do we want from each other, which is an antidote to the intellectualizing. You know, it'd be nice if we did this, if we did this, if we did this, if we did this. Brainstorm. This is a heart storm. And it says, okay. And it just gets to the point. You should have that with your daughter one of these days. Say, okay, I'm your mom, you're my daughter. So far, it's going pretty well. What do you want from me? And it gets her in the habit of being clear about who she is. And then you got to say no. Okay, thank you. The answer is no, but why'd you ask me? Because I'm interested in you. You know, part of what leadership does is it replaces prescription with curiosity. So instead of knowing what's best, here's what you should do, like performance appraisals are forms of colonialism, as if I know what's best for you. And you say, yes, but you've been here longer, blah, 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 blah. No, I don't know what's best for you. I'm here to get interested in you. And so when we ever break people into small groups, I always say, don't be helpful. Don't give advice. It's pure projection. Why don't you just be interested in another human being just for 10 minutes? It will pass. And same with raising a child. My regret in raising my children was I worry so damn much about them and had so many strong fears about how they're going to turn out. I wish I just got interested earlier. Who is this creature? You know.
I have one other question I want to ask you about and I'm also aware that I have allowed our conversation to go on a little longer than our commitment, which is only 25 minutes. But
I'm not worried about it.
I'm okay.
We have all the time in the world.
So I'm recognizing to you and to our audience that we're going on a little longer than we had promised, but I'm guessing that everyone else is going to be okay with that. And if they're not, they can turn off. So
you don't have to get cranky. Go ahead.
So you mentioned earlier that good questions in many ways create anxiety.
Always.
And I feel like there's also, like, I'm thinking about it. Well, it's so funny. I'm thinking about it as a parent, but you even, as well as in an organization, but you said you want to be getting out of the parent-child paradigm in organizations as well. So I guess what I was wondering is there a balance between creating the anxiety and maintaining safety? Or does that show up? And how does the leader, who is the leader with a capital L in that moment, creating the invitation and asking the questions, how do they take care of their own anxiety? Because there's a way that our systems are able to be more effective when we are not in an anxious state. But I hear what you're saying about the anxiety, so I want to just get your thoughts about how those two are reconciled.
People get anxious about being anxious. So to be anxious is another word for excitement, you know?
Okay.
It means you got energy for it. The anxiety comes from the unpredictability of the life and of the moment.
Okay.
And so what keeps me going with the anxiety is that I know I'm not crazy. I'm not alone, and there's nothing wrong with me. And at some point, you need to respond. It's not a constant state. And it is two-sided. You know, as a leader, I need to know some things. What are we doing here? What's the point? How do we get our money, and what promise did we make to get that money? And where should we be aimed? I think it's very fine for the person who sees the whole thing to say we're aiming over there.
Yeah.
This is the kind of service we're going to offer in the future. Now, you may want to do that out of a dialogue with people, but if you just constantly, holding people, being accountable together does not mean you can do what you want. You can't do what you want. There are boundaries, there are limits. So the leader holds the boundary and limits that the institution can't betray.
Okay.
And the leader knows the business. You know what you're doing. But now in terms of how you behave and how we're going to get there and all these questions, well, we're here to figure it out.
Okay.
And that's what you're doing with this program.
So I'm hearing it as like there is like a holding of the container and orienting of the container, but then creating the freedom within the container to help align everyone to their greatest, to their gifts, to their energy.
Exactly. Think of it as a room. So the room is a given. So we're in your living room, and you're in my office right now.
Yeah.
And so you're not going to keep changing that around, but we can decide how we want to occupy it.
Mm-hmm.
And so every time I go in a room, some rooms are amenable to community and connection. Yeah. Some are auditoriums, which are hostile. Doesn't matter. We go into the auditorium, everything's structured, nailed down, chairs don't move, all for presentation. And you say, okay, this is what the world is this is the structure. Now, how do we want to occupy? How do we want to show up together? And there's real methodology to do that.
Yeah.
And again, the questions, small groups, people who know each other the least. These are the protocols that create high-performing institutions.
All right. Well, I think we'll pause there today.
Breathe.
Before we sign off, can you talk a little bit about the offer that you are sharing with our audience?
Well, I just, design learning represents most of these ideas. It's designlearning.com. And so come to us. We're interested in finding out who you are, whether we can support you in some way. And we're also creating another experience called the Common Ground Fellowship, I wanted to mention, where we're trying to bring people who are out in organizations, churches, not-for-profits, and are trying to build community and trying to come together and say, how do we create a new discipline out of community building? Because right now, if I want to learn how to build communities, there's no place I can find to study that. I can learn a lot about management, a lot about business, not-for-profit, all that stuff. So get in touch with me. The email is pbi@att.net.
Yeah.
And we'd love to hear from anybody out there. Thank you so much, Nicole.
And there's a link in the email that they received to get to this interview where they can also access the website.
Oh, yeah.
More, all of that is there as well. So they already
yes.
in their hands.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts and your work.
What's been useful about this to you?
I'm the one that asks the questions. I don't answer them.
That's a good way to answer. Good point. I accept that.
No, it just, I always need a minute to orient my thoughts, and I always feel shy about the fact that it takes me a minute to get there. What has been useful about this for me is really the distinction between safety and possibility, and that if you're holding safety, you may be limiting possibility, and that in holding possibility, you may create some anxiety, but the excited kind, not the worrisome.
Sure. Beautiful. Thank you.
And I am excited about some new parenting strategies with my daughter.
Blame it all on me.
Absolutely. I'll send her to you.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I look forward to the next conversation.
Cool.
Bye.
Bye.